The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 45th Day. General Synthesis of the Hyperborean Wisdom. With the purpose that the analogic relation stays clearly evidenced, I will go on according to the next method. First I will affirm a premise regarding to the allegoric story of the prisoner. In the second point, I will affirm a premise to an analogic situation in the asleep man. In the third point, I will compare both premises, and I will extract a conclusion. It means, I will demonstrate the analogy. It is understood that I can't expose the totality of the correspondences without the risk of extending indefinitely. So, I will only stand out those relations that are indispensable for my exposition, and let, as an imaginative exercise, Dr. signal the possibility to establish many others. Remember that only in the asleep man, the lost self lies immersed in the conscious animic subject, it means, confused with the evolution animic subject, or soul. Here I have preferred to consider the lost self, directly attached to the reason, that's to say, the rational animic subject, by virtue of being this subject closer to the world, and who first receive the impressions of the external entities. For reason, in every case, has to be understood the animic evolution subject, property of the animal man, which evolves, due to, the confused action of the self, that manifestation of the incarcerated spirit. 1. A. The prisoner is subordinated to the gods, they maintain him, in perpetual captivity. B. The self, in the asleep man, is perpetual prisoner of the reason, it means, the animic evolution subject. C. The prisoner, and the self, are analogous. 2. A. The gods, are the dynamic intermediaries, measly by the way, between the prisoner, and the exterior world. B. The reason, is a dynamic intermediary, very poor, between the self, and the exterior world. In the asleep man. C. The gods, and the reason, are analogous. Remember that when the reason elaborates a law of the nature, intervene the mathematical principles, and the preeminent cultural premises. 3. A. The gods, make use of a known language, different to the language of the prisoner, which he has forgotten. B. The reason employs logical modalities, different to the Hyperborean primordial language, original of the asleep man which has been forgotten, due to the strategic confusion. C. The own language of the gods is analogous to the logical modalities of the cultural structure. The natal language of the prisoner is analogous to the Hyperborean language of the asleep man. 4. A. The first environment of the prisoner is his cell of the tower, which contains everything with the exception of the aperture's door and window, where only very weakly can be extended the senses. B. The first environment of the self is the sphere of shadow, which contains almost everything. C. The cell of the tower is analogous to the sphere of the shadow in the asleep man. 5. A. In the cell, exists a barred window, through which the prisoner obtains a precarious image but direct, of the exterior world. B. Establishing a permanent contact with the self is the sensorial sphere, through which it obtains a precarious image but direct, of the exterior world. C. The barred window is analogous to the sensorial sphere, or of the senses, in the asleep man. 6. A. In the cell exists a barred door, through which the guards get into, and with them the censored news, in other words, where the prisoner obtains an indirect image, of the exterior world. B. The self can make an indirect image, of the exterior world by the reflection, it means, the act through which he receives the reason information. C. The barred door is analogous to the act of reflect, or to warn. 7. A. The cell of the prisoner is in a tower, and this one in a walled courtyard. Surrounding the walls are deep pits, and then other walls, and other pits, and so on until they complete 7 turns of walls and pits. The 7 circuits of security of this formidable prison, are connected each other by drawbridges, corridors, gates, drawbars, etc. Beyond the last wall extends the exterior world, the country of the enemy. In synthesis, the prison is a static structure that interposes between the prisoner and the exterior world. B. Between the self and the exterior world interposes a complex static structure called cultural. The reason to make reasonable the information of the exterior world supports in certain elements of the static or cultural structure, for example, the preeminent cultural premises, which means concepts of the perception of the entities or the external cultural objects. C. The prison is analogous to the cultural structure. Also, some parts of the prison, walls, pits, bridges, etc., are analogous to some parts of the cultural structure, that is, the preeminent cultural premises. Take present, Dr. Signal that, in the allegory, even the guards and the prison are intermediaries between the prisoner and the exterior world. But the guards are dynamic intermediaries, analogous to the reason in the asleep man, while the prison is a static intermediary, analogous to the cultural structure of the asleep man. 8. A. Beyond the last wall of the prison extends the exterior world, that reality that will be never seen by the prisoner, because the structure of the prison limits his movement and because a guard permanently cares to maintain that situation. B. The self, in the asleep man, is usually immersed in the depths of the cultural structure, floating lost within its artificial and static elements and subordinated to the implacable tyranny that the reason performs. The cultural structure surrounds completely the self, except for some slits, from where weakly emerges the sensorial sphere. Beyond the cultural structure, as object of the sensorial and instinctive spheres, extends the exterior world, the reality that couldn't be seen, on its truth, just how it is, by the lost self. C. The exterior world, beyond the prison, is analogous to the exterior world, beyond the cultural structure, that sustains the self, in the asleep man. 9. A. In a nearby mountain, the Cameratans try to help the prisoner to escape from the prison. For it they send a message, in their natal language, using the acoustic way. In that message there is an infantile song, to awake the prisoner, and a love song, with the key of the ring, to search the secret exit and escape. B. In an occult center called Agartha, the loyal gods try to help the asleep man, to break the chains that maintains him, immersed in the material world of the demiurge. For this, they send charismatically a message in the language of the birds, using the runes of Nevton. In the message there is a primordial memory, to wake up, and orientate the man, and a love song, with the key of the ring, to search the center, go back to the origin, abandon, as a god, the material hell, of Jehovah Satan. C. It can be established, between A and B, many analogies. I will only stand out the more important of them. The Cameratans are analogous to the Liberator's gods. I believe that the 9 aforementioned arguments constitute an effective demonstration of the analogic correspondence that exists between the allegory and the situation of the asleep man. But this is not all. I have reserved 3 components of the allegory: infantile song, love song, secret exit, to effectuate a last analogic correspondence and extract the final conclusion. As the validity of the existence of the analogic relation has been evidenced on the aforementioned arguments, it won't be necessary to draw on the same method in the next commentary. I will consider proved all the mentioned analogies. I will remember now the reasons that took me to elaborate the allegory. I have proposed to demonstrate, in an analogic way, the method employed by the loyal gods to counteract the action of the culture, strategic arm of the Synarchy. Previously, I clarified that are the interior cultural elements, the real instruments that the Synarchy used to keep the man asleep. It means, in the confusion. In that state the self is subordinated to the reason by the cultural structure, source from which is nourished, finally, all the mental activity. In that way occurs that the self, that's to say, the present consciousness of man, results directed to the world, through the cultural structure by the reason. The result, I said it many times, is a deformed vision of the world and a psychic state of confusion that hinders enormously the strategic reorientation of man. Against this situation the loyal gods, as well as the cameradin of the allegory, are disposed to help sending a message. The principal objective is to circumvent all the walls, and reach to the prisoner, the self, with a message of double meaning. First, awaken; second, orientate. For it, the loyal gods transmit the message charismatically, since many millenniums ago. Some ones hear them, awake, and go. Others, most of them, continue in the confusion. Of course, it is not easy to recognize the message, because it has been emitted in the language of the birds, and their sounds can only be perceived with the pure blood. It is clear. The message of the loyal gods permanently resonates in the blood of the asleep man. Those who don't it is because he suffers strategic confusion, or unknown it existence, what is the same. But how the message should accomplish the function of the charismatic message? In 2 steps. In first place the gods speak, to the blood of men, of a primordial memory, of something occurred at the beginning of time, when the spirit had not been captured yet, by the gods of the matter. How do the gods make it, is a very big mystery, that only them can respond. This primordial memory, the infantile song of the allegory, has been induced with the purpose, to activate the own memory of blood, of the asleep man. If such thing occurs, then the asleep man will experience a sudden nostalgia of another world, a desire to leave all, and go. Technically means that the memory of blood, has reached, there, where the lost self was, over the conscious subject. Such contact, between the self and the memory of blood, is realized independently of the cultural structure and the reason, and that objective is searched by the loyal gods. In that case they've reached to them duller at the self, by the way of blood. Will be then, in that fugacious moment when the prisoner will let to hear the Elev song. A merit. I will talk now about the second part of the message, which I have named allegorically, Elev song. First of all I will tell that this name is not capricious, because the Hyperborean wisdom teaches that, from its origin in the physical universe, it means, since its synchronization with the time, the spirit remains chained to the matter, by a mystery of Elev. When the memory of blood, activated by the first part of the message, opens a path, not rational, not cultural to the self, then the loyal gods sing the Elev song, they make men participate in the mystery. If their blood is not sufficiently pure to understand consciously the charismatic message, then, men have the possibility to orientate themselves towards the origin, and stays definitely awake. The mystery of blood can be only revealed by the pure blood, internally, in the transcendental contact with the self, which is realized without the intervention of rational or cultural categories. So, it is an absolutely individual experience, unique for every man. Who knows the secret of the mystery of love, is a transmuted Hyperborean initiate, or an immortal man of stone. The mystery of Elev is a personal discovering, I repeat, unique for every man about the truth of his own fall. No one can know the secret and go on, in the same way. And nobody would dare to talk about it, when the supreme experience has been experienced. On the contrary, many times the lips are sealed forever, the eyes blinded, and the ears closed. Not few hairs turn white, and even less the minds that fall in a shades of madness. Because only an infinite courage can sustain, alive and sane, to who has seen the deceit of the origins, and has understood, finally, the truth of his fall. Being the weight of the secret such terrible it is comprehended, why I say that never should be an indication of the mystery of Elev, and only a madman, or irresponsible, would affirm the contrary. The Hyperborean wisdom gives techniques to purify the blood, which purposes to approach to the mystery. But the mystery, by itself, has to be internally discovered, is unique for every man and it is not appropriated to talk about it. only can be offered some suggestions, like those that I exposed the 8th and 9th day when I narrated about the ritual of the cold fire. The allegoric story of the prisoner has permitted to expose in a simply form the method used by the loyal gods to guide the asleep men. The charismatic message permits, if as heard, to awake man, putting him in contact with his memory of blood. Then make him participate in the mystery of Elev, supreme experience that nullifies, as we said, the cultural strategy at the synarchy. But it is not possible to know in what consists the mystery of Elev, until it has been experienced individually. There are only the general indications of those who have transmuted and gone. Based in those indications, it can be affirmed that the mystery of Elev is experienced in 7 different ways by man, and that, precisely, due to this the Hyperborean wisdom provides 7 initiatory paths of liberation. According to the way how the mystery of Elev has been gnostically perceived, will be the path of liberation adopted, and it's for this reason that it is usually talk about a path of mutation, or of the ray, of a dry path, or right-hand path, or of a wet path, or left-hand path, or one of the path of strategic opposition, or path of the Gnostic warrior for the absolute orientation, etc. I will not talk, of course, about all the liberation paths, but I will talk of which that has an especial relation with this history, that is, the path of the strategic opposition, which was the one followed by the house of Tharsis. But, the path of the strategic opposition is the last interpretation of the ancient mystery of the labyrinth, founded by Neptune, after the submersion of the Atlantis. To the house of Tharsis, the second part of the Elev song, which was heard during the ritual of the cold fire, revealed the mystery of the labyrinth, as an individual path of liberation. It means that, the lords of Tharsis, always, understood the mystery of the labyrinth, when transmuting into man of stone. Referred to the allegory of the prisoner self, it must be understood that the Neptune solution, of the mystery of the labyrinth, the mystery of the spiritual incarceration, the mystery of the death, is analogous to the solution of the Elev song. It consists, in a way, for first, awake, and second, orientate. Which way is what was lastly called path of the strategic opposition, and that includes, necessarily, the employment of the runes, and the principle of the enclosure. In the allegory, the second part of the message was quite extensive, because it referred also to the other paths of liberation, that can open the mystery of Elev. But the prisoner has found the key in the wedding ring, and that means, analogically, that has opted for the path of the strategic opposition. The message has got to him by the acoustic way, it means, gnostically, and, when taking consciousness of its content, through the revealed key, finds in the cell circlet, which allows to open the secret exit. The cell, according to the argument 4, is analogous to sphere of shadow. But, as a substrate of the sphere of shadow, is the cultural structure. A dissimulated circlet, on the floor of the cell, corresponds undoubtedly to a mathematical principle, an archetypical integrated symbol, dissimulated, in the scheme of a relation. The allegory permits us to comprehend, then, that the liberators' gods, with their charismatic message, discover a mathematical principle, which remained unconscious in the cultural structure, which we named principle of the enclosure. Thereby. 10. C. The circlet, in the cell of the prisoner, is analogous to the principle of the enclosure, mathematical principle, or collective archetype, which remained unconscious in the asleep man, and that the message of the liberator's gods discover. I demonstrated, days ago, that in the mental process that give place to the scientific idea of a phenomenon concurs elements of 2 main sources, the mathematical principles, and the preeminent cultural premises. This can be verified mainly when formulating a law of the nature, which explains the behavior of a phenomenon establishing causal relations between aspects of the same. I will give a simple example. To measure the side of a regular polyhedron. Here the phenomenon is a corpus with the form of a regular polyhedron. It means a phenomenonic entity. it takes for it the graduated rule, which is a flat surface where are engraved the longitudinal units, and from which we are secure that one of its sides is perfectly straight. We make it coincide with the zero in the rule or with the beginning of the object that we will measure. It is observed now that the end of the side coincides with the number 5 of the ruler, and it is affirmed without more that in the polyhedron, the side measures 5 centimeters. It has been realized, as will be seen, a series of subjective operations which conclusions, however, can be confirmed by other observers. This possibility of testing is what gives the designation of law of the nature to the mentioned fact. But, it occurs that in the ruler, that we believe numbered, are really engraved signs that represent numbers, not numbers themselves. The numbers are mathematical principles, property of the cultural structure, subjective elements, which intervene in the act to recognize that the limit of the side coincides with the sign 5. When we say measures 5 centimeters, we make the affirmation of an empirical quality. Exists a proportionate means, a mathematical relation, between the longitude of the side of the polyhedron, and longitude of the Earth meridian. This proportion is inert or constant equal 5 centimeters, and constitutes a relation between aspects of a phenomenon, that's to say, a law of the nature. The centimeter is equivalent to the 100th part of the meter, and this to the 10 millionth part of a quarter of an Earth meridian. The phenomenonic entity has been entirely presented, full on its manifestation. However, it is not possible to apprehend it, on its totality, by observing one part of it makes eminent, protruding, and standing out over the other aspects. The unity of the phenomenon has been broken, in favor of the plurality of qualities that can be attributed to it. Are distinguished 2 squared faces, and on each faces, 4 edges and 4 angles, etc. Then it is practiced the measure of each edge, or side, and it is established a law of the nature. The longitude of the side is proportional to the longitude of the Earth meridian, and its ratio is of 5 centimeters. In this operation that I have just described, have intervened the mathematical principles, when 2 faces are distinguished, 4 edges, etc. And the preeminent cultural premises, when the face, the side, or any other quality turned eminent. The both sources concur in the rational act of relate, measure aspects of the phenomenon, and to postulate as law of the nature. Measures 5 centimeters, which can be universally proven. I hope to have clarified that the mathematical principles, the 1, the 2, the square, etc., for being intrinsic properties of the mental structure, intervene a priori in the formulation of a law of the nature. Referring to the numbers of the world, those that appear engraved in the graduated ruler are just cultural signs of representation that are distinguished due to the conventional learning. There were ancient people that represented the numbers with knots or ideograms. It is presumable that a measure instrument composed by a rod in which has been engraved hieroglyphs doesn't means, in the beginning, nothing to us if we cannot read the signs. It means, realize the numerical representations. The epistemological analysis about the manner how men establish a law of the nature will take us to the fatal conclusion that it would be impossible that the enclosure principle could be localized in the world as a property of the entities, and be formulated in a sociocultural language. On the contrary, what can occur, in any case, is that the principle of enclosure be projected, conscious or unconscious, on a phenomenon, and then be discovered on it, as an eminent relation between qualities. Naturally, will depend of the kind of phenomenon represented, the complexity through which the enclosure principle be empirically recognized and introjected in the psychic structure. In sum, the enclosure principle, discovered on the consciousness through the message of the loyal gods, is also a mathematical principle, and as such will intervene a priori in every phenomenonic perception. The natural numbers that are in the mind allow to count 1, 2 the halves of the double that is in the world. The enclosure principle that is in the mind allows the application of the law of the enclosure on that phenomenon that is in the world. I have traveled a long journey to arrive to this conclusion. I will express it now in a general form. The principle of the enclosure will make possible the determination of the law of the enclosure in every phenomenon and in any relation between phenomenons. But the enclosure principle is generally unconscious, and only who can hear the message of the loyal gods can incorporate it to the conscious sphere. And only them, the awake ones, will be able to apply the law of the enclosure in a warrior strategy that ensures the return to the origin. Before I mentioned the Nectan's solution to the mystery to the labyrinth, and I said that it includes the employment of the runes, and the principle of the enclosure. Now I will add to that solution, called T-robing Widana, which is translated in the Achaemonic technique of the Hyperborean wisdom. That technique, which is indispensable to dominate in the strategic way of life, allows to define in the universe and strategic enclosure, that I referred the 3rd and 36th day. Well, according to the Hyperborean wisdom, every strategic enclosure is technically an Achaemone, or infinite enclosure. In other words, the awake man discovers the enclosure principle, and projects it to the world. That is not enough to build an strategic enclosure. The principle of enclosure is a mathematical principle, so is an archetypal element. It means, created by the one. In a badly way could be used, an element created by the one to attempt the isolation from the strategy of the one. It is necessary to modify, then, the law of the enclosure, to obtain the desired desolator effect. In what way? In determinating, or converting in infinite the real enclosure. This is achieved using the uncrated runes. The inclusion of the uncrated rune, in the law of the enclosure, produces the strategic enclosure. The infinite enclosure from where it is possible to practice the strategic way of life and elaborate in strategy to return to the origin. The path of the strategic opposition is applicable by every awake man who disposes of a strategic enclosure, and elapas oppositionis. This last element is just a stone of opposition. It means, a stone that represents the one, and against which is realized the strategic opposition, that allows to approach, inversely, to the origin. The lapas oppositionis is situated out of the Achaemone, in front of the infinite point of the strategic enclosure. When the Hyperborean initiate performs the strategic opposition, the interior of the Achaemone becomes a liberated area, with a known time and space, independent from the space-time of the created universe. Thus isolated, never abandoning the strategic opposition, the initiate advances with no obstacle towards the origin, get out from the labyrinth, and he liberates his spirit from the material prison. I will clarify the etymological meaning of the word Achaemone, and the philosophical sense that denotes in the Hyperborean wisdom. Achaemone, first of all, is a word composed by two Greek words, arch, beginning, and monads, unity. The initiation by the Achaemonic technique allows arriving to a unique principle of the psyche, that is, the egoic individuation of the selbst, from where it is feasible to experiment the absolute possibility of the spirit in the origin. This is the Hyperborean sense of the Achaemone. For the man of stone, Hyperborean initiate of the house of Tharsis, the world, in which occurs the daily life, is only a battlefield, occupied by mortal enemies, that he must fight without truce, because they cut the path to return to the origin, obstruct the retreat, and pretend to reduce men to the vilest slavery, which is the submission of the eternal spirit to the mate, are his incarceration to the evolution plan of the universe, created by the Demiurge, and his demon's court. Thereby, the world is for the man of stone, the Velplades. In the Norse mythology, in the Eddas, the Velplades is the battlefield, where Wotan chooses the ones who fall fighting for the honor, the truth, in the world, for the virtues of the spirit. The House of Tharsis, according to the Hyperborean wisdom, extended the concept of Velplades to all the world. But the world is the macrocosm, where subsists the potential microcosm of the awake man. The reality of that world that surrounds as the Velplades the awake man, is Maya, the illusion of the great deceit. when the awake man has been situated in his akemone, and liberates the interior area through the strategic opposition, indeterminating or turning infinite the real enclosure, the lapis oppositionis, that is in the velplades. It is said that its area constitutes the fenestra infernalis of the akemone, the infinite point of the strategic enclosure. The fenestra infernalis is the point of higher approximation between the liberated area and the velplades, and in front of it struggles the awake man and the demiurge. Face to face are confronted two total strategies, the Hyperborean and the Satanic. As a last reflection referred to the allegory, I will say that when the prisoner pulls the circlet and discovers the secret exit is effectuating an analogous action to when the awake man applies the law of the enclosure, according to the akemonic technique, and unequivocal and irreversibly a path to the origin. Therefore, it has been explained the method that the loyal gods uses to counteract the culture strategic enemy arm. They send their message, which finality is to wake up in man the memory of blood, and orientate him to the origin, his secret exit. Finally they induce to discover the principle of the enclosure, and to apply, then, the akemonic technique. The principle of the enclosure is infallible for the strategic proposed objectives, and it can be applied individually and also collectively. History is full of examples of people that have applied techniques based in a Hyperborean wisdom, to immortalize themselves as gods, or to guide a populace of pure blood towards the collective mutation. As a proof of those glorious actions have remained many constructions of stone that nobody understands today, because to do that would need to have a vision founded in the principle of the enclosure. To the awake man, knower of the akemonic technique, with just one look to the megalithic constructions, or over Mont Segura, or the KZ, is enough to correctly interpret the Hyperborean strategy, from which its construction was based. The castle of Mont Segura, it is worthy to clarify, was constructed by the Cathars following the akemonic technique, as well as the KZ or Konzentrationslager, concentration camps, of the German Black Order SS, which were not sinister prisons, as the synarchic propaganda pretends. They were really wonderful magic machines, to accelerate the collective and racial mutation, based on the akemonic technique of the Hyperborean wisdom. Inside of the isolated area of the KZ, the most harmful racial elements of the society, the degenerates, the criminals, the vicious, or even the Jews, were able to be transmuted and reoriented in favor of the national strategy. I will finally say that, who is conscious of the principle of the enclosure has surpassed the cultural enemy strategy, and can realize the double isolation of the self and the microcosm. The principle of enclosure will let us, the establishment of the limits of the conscious subject, isolating the self from the preeminent cultural premises, and transferring it to the center, or selbst. The akemonic technique will let us, thereby, to isolate the microcosm from the macrocosm, gaining an own space and time. It means, the immortality, the microcosm, or physical body will be transmuted in Vihara, the incorruptible matter.